I never thought that my daughter's wedding would end up being the stage where she humiliated me in front of 200 people and pretended I was a stranger. Rachel pulled me aside seconds before the music started. Not even a full whisper, just that sharp, rehearsed hiss right in my ear. "I don't want you walking me down the aisle. Your face doesn't fit the image I'm curating." Her hand didn't touch mine. Her eyes flicked to the open church doors where the guests were already standing, waiting. My palm was slick from holding her bouquet during the last-minute run-through. I'd offered to carry it for her, like I always carried the rest. I stepped back, nodded once. No tears. Not yet. I walked sideways toward the far pews, careful not to trip on the runner. Someone, probably the wedding coordinator, motioned for me to sit in the second row behind a cousin I didn't recognize, next to an empty chair where her father would have been if cancer hadn't taken him 6 years ago. The photographer paused mid-shot, camera halfway down, confusion in his face. He knew me. I'd hired him for Rachel's high school graduation party. He didn't lift the lens again until Rachel locked arms with James's father and started down the aisle like nothing was wrong. They dressed her in ivory lace and a veil too long for the room. It dragged behind her, covering the floor I paid to have polished the night before. When she passed me, she didn't look. I don't remember the readings, not the music. Just that second-row view of the back of her head, of her friends snapping photos, the priest smiling like everything made sense. The shame didn't bloom. It detonated. In my chest. In my throat. In the way my legs ached from standing too long in borrowed heels, she said would match the aesthetic. After the recessional, I walked toward the photographer, who hadn't moved from his corner spot. "Are you still getting the dinner shots?" He blinked. "She told me to cut those. Said family photos weren't necessary after the ceremony." 2 weeks earlier, Rachel had called from her downtown loft, all warmth and laughter, asking if I'd mind helping finalize guest list payments at St. Anthony's Parish Hall since, quote, "You're so good with numbers, Mom." It was a Wednesday, and she caught me just as I was pulling meatloaf from the oven. She didn't ask how I'd been or whether I had plans. Just launched into it. The guest count was locked, the church needed final head counts, and the hall wanted everything paid up front. I could hear James in the background, talking about wine options, then laughing like they were already living in a sitcom version of marriage. Rachel kept her voice light, full of flattery. "You've always been the organized one. You used to balance our bills on scraps of paper, remember?" I said yes, of course. That tone in her voice always worked on me, the one where she sounded 15 again, unsure but trusting. I didn't ask why she couldn't handle it herself. I didn't ask about the budget. I just asked where the forms were, and whether she'd already started the process with the parish. She said she'd email over the vendor spreadsheet and a scanned ledger the priest needed, signed, "Just formality stuff." The next morning, I drove down to the church office and met with the coordinator. I smiled, handed over the paperwork, and even wrote a small check for the difference she said they hadn't covered, $163, telling myself it was part of my wedding gift. Rachel had mentioned they were tight on cash after the dress alterations. I didn't ask why the numbers on the form didn't quite match the quotes I remembered her sharing earlier. I told myself it didn't matter. They were young, and young people always made messy math. That night, she texted me a photo of the church pews set with mock-up programs. James and Rachel, a sacred beginning. My name wasn't listed under the family acknowledgments. I stared at the screen and told myself they probably just ran out of space. Or maybe she was saving it for something more personal at the reception. Back at my condo later that evening, I replayed a few moments. Rachel subtly excluding me from bridal fittings, asking me to use the side entrance at the rehearsal, and then her comment about guests not needing a reminder of the trailer park we came from, which finally snapped something clean in me. I tried to let it slide. Every mother-daughter pair has friction. But it wasn't friction anymore. It was editing. She wasn't trimming a few awkward edges to keep the day smooth. She was cutting me out of the frame. I remembered the boutique appointment I was accidentally left off the email for, only to be told later that the girls just went spur of the moment. I remembered how she winced when I brought a batch of homemade cookies to the planning meeting. Store-bought was more on brand, apparently. She kept saying things like that, on brand, curated, aesthetic. Words that didn't belong to the girl who used to lie on the kitchen floor, doing her math homework while I folded laundry. I'd spent years telling myself she was just growing into a different life, that her polish was earned, not weaponized. But the more I saw, the more it looked like she wasn't just building a new life. She was burying the old one. I opened my file cabinet and pulled out the wedding folder she'd sent me to keep, just in case anything gets misplaced. I started reading it like a paralegal again, not a mother. Receipts. Quotes. Notes in her handwriting, all too neat. There was a printed spreadsheet labeled Event Allocation with a line marked External Family Support and a dollar amount that didn't match anything I'd given. A note beside it, handled by M. M for me? Or someone else? I circled it with a red pen and drew a question mark in the margin. My old habits kicking in from back when I used to prep filings for a law firm that barely paid me minimum wage. The next morning, at the community library's public computer terminal, I accessed our old joint tax records from 2016, curious why Rachel had insisted I file them jointly with her for scholarship eligibility back then, and the numbers didn't line up with her current lifestyle. The login still worked. I'd kept the IRS pin in a plastic sleeve in my wallet, taped behind my old voter registration. Rachel had begged me that year, swearing it was just to qualify for a needs-based award. I was skeptical even then, but she cried on the phone, said she didn't want to lose her spot at Georgetown. I told myself it was temporary. One of those gray-line decisions a mother makes when her kid's standing on the edge of something better. But now, seeing it all lined up in black and white rows, our reported income, the deductions, the trust interest, I saw how deliberate it had been. She had declared me as a dependent, not the other way around. At 22, she had claimed caregiving expenses and minor household contributions, then used them to qualify herself as head of household for certain financial instruments. All of it filed under an address I never lived at. I printed the summary sheets, 50 cents a page, and folded them into my tote. I didn't want to draw attention, but I kept the pages face down. Even on the walk back to my car, someone could have seen my hands shaking and assumed nerves. It wasn't nerves. It was shame, creeping in with every line of fine print that proved I'd let her script my role years ago and never checked the stage directions. I drove home with the radio off, window cracked, the old Civic engine humming like it always had. I didn't cry, not even when I pulled into the lot and saw a wedding magazine wedged in my mailbox, forwarded from Rachel's old address with a bright pink sticker, returned to sender. I sat in the car for 10 full minutes and just stared at that sticker. I reached out to Carol Taggart, my old accountant and now a parish board member, who agreed to quietly go over the wedding expense statements Rachel had submitted to the church's donation ledger for facility use. Carol didn't flinch when I asked. We'd done night classes together in the 90s, both of us working reception at that awful tax prep firm where men explained basic math to us like it was magic. She knew how to read between lines without flinching. I told her Rachel had asked me to handle a few church payments and that something wasn't adding up. Carol didn't press, just said, "Drop them by and I'll take a look." That Friday, I handed her the envelope over the counter at the parish office. She waited until the hallway was clear before sliding it under her blotter. "Give me through Sunday," she said, scribbling her initials on the back. Her tone stayed even, but I could tell something in her already didn't like what she saw. The ledger Rachel submitted looked polished, down to the fake cursive signatures and staged invoice numbers. One form had the words "in-kind support," anonymous family member scribbled in the margin, a vague note referencing off-ledger trust allocation for venue deposits. The handwriting was familiar, not mine. Carol called me Sunday night. "You didn't authorize any trust fund disbursements, did you?" I told her no. I hadn't even known there was a trust with accessible funds. Her silence was short, then surgical. "Then you need to see this." She didn't send it through email. She printed a copy and taped it behind the bulletin board in the church kitchen, where no one would find it unless they knew to look. I picked it up Monday morning, folded it into the crossword section of my paper, one invoice from La Scala Events, a boutique wedding service in the city. The amount was $22,500, marked paid in full. The remitter name wasn't Rachel's. It was RJS Revocable Grantor Trust, Secondary, M. Henderson. My initials. My maiden name. Carol emailed me a single JPEG, an invoice from La Scala Events for $22,500, paid in full using a trust account I'd never heard of, labeled RJS Revocable Grantor Trust, Secondary M. Henderson. I zoomed in on the file until the pixels broke apart, hunting for a mistake. The signature on the remittance line caught my eye first. It wasn't mine, but it wasn't Rachel's either. It was someone trying to copy the long, looping cursive I'd used back when we still wrote checks. The first name was scribbled Michael, my ex-husband's name. Dead 6 years, his handwriting buried with him. The date was from 3 months ago, right around the time Rachel had canceled dinner on me 3 weekends in a row, citing venue tours and back-to-back tastings. I'd believed her, even sent her a little bottle of migraine tea when she said all the driving had worn her out. Now I imagined her sitting in an office, forging our names, spending trust money neither of us had granted her access to. The trust's name, RJS, used her full initials, Rachel Jean Summers. It wasn't subtle, just buried under layers of legal-sounding jargon meant to bore or confuse anyone who didn't know what to look for. But I'd worked just enough years in just enough dusty law offices to know what a revocable grantor trust actually meant. Someone had created a legal entity using my name as the silent grantor, which made me liable. I pulled out the old fireproof box from my coat closet, the one labeled estate/custody/financial. Inside, I kept Michael's final will, our custody filings, and the documents we'd used when setting up Rachel's education savings. Nowhere, not in the notarized trust agreement, not in the death certificate addendum, was there permission for early withdrawal, especially not from a secondary account I never approved. I called Carol and asked her to check one more thing, whether the trust had been filed locally or out of state. She called back 15 minutes later. County Clerk. Registered under your maiden name. Witness signature? I asked. Forged. Same hand did both lines. I drove to the county clerk's office and used my paralegal experience to look up the trust registry. Sure enough, Rachel had opened the trust using a forged version of my late ex-husband's signature, along with my maiden name listed as the silent grantor. The office was quiet, midweek. 2 women waited in line ahead of me, one renewing a business license, the other picking up marriage records. I smiled politely, kept my folder clutched to my chest, and waited until the clerk at window 3 called, "Next." She was young, no older than Rachel, with a careful kindness that grated more than it comforted. I passed over the request slip and said I needed access to any revocable trust filed under the name Margaret Henderson between 2018 and 2021. My legal name hadn't been Henderson since 1986. The search took 6 minutes. She printed a single-page trust summary and said, "Let me know if you need copies. The full documents are available through the archive vault." I read the title line 3 times. RJS Revocable Grantor Trust. Grantor, Margaret A. Henderson. Co-trustee, Rachel J. Summers. Witness, Michael T. Summers. My stomach flipped. That signature, Michael's, was clumsy, crooked, too even. He had a tremor in his hand near the end, but this version looked like it came off a wedding invitation. Below it, a second signature, mine. Except it wasn't. Too upright. No left slant. My R's never curled. I asked for certified copies and paid in cash. She stamped the receipt and said, "The vault's running behind. Expect a call within 3 business days." I nodded and left. Back in the parking lot, I sat with the papers spread across my steering wheel. It wasn't just theft. It was planning. Rachel hadn't stumbled into a mess or panicked over bills. She'd built a structure with forged names, buried it under estate jargon, and funded her wedding with money that legally still belonged to me. Not just me, either. Michael had left that trust in place for our grandchildren. I looked at the receipt again. 3 days. That gave me just enough time to prepare my next move. When I confronted Rachel with the photocopy over brunch, she laughed too quickly and said I must be misremembering again and suggested I up my prescription, gaslighting me right in the middle of Olive Garden while her fiancé stared silently into his wine. She'd picked the place, not me. Said it was low stress, as if table breadsticks and endless salad would cushion what she clearly expected to be a casual update, not a reckoning. I waited until our drinks arrived. Then I pulled the copy of the trust summary from my bag, just one page, folded neatly down the center, and placed it next to her bread plate. Her eyes flicked down and back up in half a second. No pause, no surprise. "You're digging up old forms now," she said, voice light, as if I'd handed her a grocery list. "Mom, you know how messy probate stuff is. No one remembers who signed what. It's all just framework." "It's forged," I said. "He never signed that." "Neither did I. The county will confirm it within 72 hours. Her smile twitched. James shifted in his seat. I looked at him, then back at her. "You used his name, his signature, for a trust he left untouched for over a decade." Rachel took a long sip of her mimosa and said, too loudly, "You've been forgetting things lately. I told you to get that looked at." Then she leaned in, lower now. "Do you really want to start unraveling all this? You think anyone's going to care about paperwork if you start sounding unstable?" The server brought our entrees. She thanked him sweetly and picked up her fork without missing a beat. James didn't say a word, just kept swirling his wine and not looking at either of us. I didn't touch my food. Instead, I pulled my phone from my bag, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. Then I said, "Rachel, I'm going to give you until Monday to return the funds to the trust account. After that, I escalate." She blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means I stop being your mother in this conversation and start being the trustee." 3 days later, I retrieved 2 more documents from the archive vault, one showing a $9,200 withdrawal labeled Venue Advance, and another a wire transfer to a private vendor in Aspen for a bachelorette party I was never invited to, both drawn from an account linked to my Social Security number. The clerk handed me the sealed envelope without ceremony. His name tag said Marcus, but he didn't ask why I needed trust transaction records dated years after my ex-husband's death. I thanked him, walked straight to my car, and locked the doors before opening it. The first sheet was the withdrawal slip, printed on county letterhead, dated 5 weeks ago. It included the last 4 digits of my SSN next to a notation. Disbursed via co-trustee authorization. The handwriting was Rachel's. Not disguised, not altered, just brazen. Below that, a line item from a secondary expense report. Venue Advance La Scala Events minus $9,200. Meaning the $22,500 Carol found wasn't the full payment, this was the prepayment. The second document chilled me more. A wire transfer receipt for $6,750 routed to a Maple and Rose Events LLC, Aspen, Colorado. The memo line read, "Bachelorette coordination. 7 guests, chalet rental, private chef." I hadn't even been told she was going to Aspen. When I asked about her bachelorette, she'd said it was just a spa weekend with the girls. Nothing big. I'd offered to pay for her massage. She never replied. I pressed the 2 pages flat on my dashboard, stared at them until the words blurred. This wasn't incompetence. It was entitlement. Rachel had accessed funds tied to my name and used them like party favors. I wondered if she even flinched as she signed my name on those requests. Back at home, I found a dusty folder in my safe labeled Michael's Guardianship Review from 1998, which contained the original custody paperwork proving I held full legal control of Rachel's trust until her 30th birthday, next month, meaning she'd forged emancipation papers and moved the money early. I hadn't looked in that safe in years. The lock still stuck, and I had to jiggle it twice before the latch gave. The folder was wedged between our old mortgage payoff letter and the handwritten eulogy I'd never read at Michael's funeral. The paper had curled from time and heat, but the signatures were clear. Judge Dempsey's stamp, my name as custodial guardian, and the clause that mattered most, trust accessible by beneficiary only upon completion of 30th year of age, unless emancipated by court order and certified approval from legal guardian. Rachel was 29. Her birthday wasn't until July 8th. There was no court order, no approval, just her lies and forged forms. The second page listed my legal responsibilities as trustee. Notify any financial institutions of unauthorized movement, preserve trust assets, and pursue recovery in cases of misuse. A duty, not an option. I reread it twice. It felt like a test written decades in advance, waiting for this exact breach. I made 2 sets of high-resolution copies, one for legal, one for safekeeping, then wrapped the originals in plastic and placed them in a manila envelope marked hard evidence. My printer buzzed through each page, the light flickering as it scanned the last official proof that Rachel wasn't just dishonest. She was criminally early. I paused at the bottom of the last page and ran my finger along Michael's signature. I remembered how serious he'd been about the trust, how he wanted Rachel to have opportunity, not indulgence. This wasn't about punishment. It was about principle and memory. I called Carol, told her what I'd found. She went quiet, then said, "Then she broke federal trust law. That's bank-level fraud, Evelyn." I spent a sleepless night staring at the ceiling, realizing that Rachel had stolen from both my future and her late father's memory, and when I called Carol the next morning, she quietly confirmed that forging trust emancipation was bank-level fraud. I lay in the dark for hours, no light, no TV, just the quiet hum of the fridge down the hall. I kept replaying every moment I'd brushed off. Every time Rachel waved off a detail, downplayed an expense, changed the subject. All those signals I swallowed to keep the peace. My mistake wasn't trust. It was deference. I let her convince me she'd earned the right to decide which parts of her history to keep and which ones to erase. But she hadn't just rewritten me. She'd rewritten Michael. That part made me cold all over. I called Carol at 8:02 a.m. and skipped the pleasantries. She filed forged emancipation documents, I said. The trust clearly states I retain control until July 8th. No court order, no guardian release. She bypassed both. I heard her inhale. Then, "That's criminal misrepresentation. It doesn't stay in civil court if the financial amount crosses certain thresholds." What's the line? Federal level? $25,000. Between the La Scala invoice, the Aspen wire transfer, and the prepayment slip, Rachel had crossed that line weeks ago. Carol offered to refer me to a trust litigation attorney in the city. I told her yes, and she said she'd call ahead to ensure discretion. She also mentioned the parish was aware of, quote, financial inconsistencies related to the donation ledger. Father Leary had asked her to update him by the end of the week. There it was, my first deadline, Friday. I hung up and opened a fresh notebook, wrote the words, timeline, leverage, names, then listed everything in order. Not just what Rachel had done, but what I'd done in response. I logged it like evidence. Because it was. And because if I didn't take control of the narrative now, she'd rewrite that too. That Sunday at Mass, Father Leary saw me crying during the offering and, without asking questions, offered me the use of the church's fellowship room and sound system. "Should you ever want to make a statement, Evelyn?" And I accepted, trembling but clear. It wasn't performative. I hadn't planned on crying. It just broke through when the ushers passed the collection plates and the choir sang about mercy. I didn't sob. Just one of those sharp, embarrassing slips that catches in your chest and falls down your cheek before you can swallow it. I wiped it away fast, but I knew he saw. He didn't make a scene. Just waited by the vestibule after service while the parishioners filtered out in clumps of perfume and small talk. Then he stepped forward, gently touched my elbow and said, "If you need a space to tell the truth, the parish will stand behind you. Not in secret, not as gossip, as witness." I said yes before I could second-guess myself. He unlocked the fellowship room on the spot, showed me how the mic connected to the ceiling speakers, pointed to the projector in case I wanted to display anything. "We have a guest Wi-Fi password," he added, "and you're free to bring in whoever you trust to help coordinate." I looked at that room. Not the decor, not the folding chairs, but the space itself. The platform at the front wasn't tall, but it was high enough to see every guest's face. I imagined Rachel's, her friends, her new in-laws. I told Father Leary I'd only need 5 minutes after the toast at the reception. He nodded, understanding more than I'd said. "The DJ's cooperative," he added. "Just give him your cue. We'll ensure the mic is yours." Outside, I called Carol and told her I was taking the public route. She didn't ask why. She just said, "I'll bring the notarized summaries." I handed Rachel a card during the rehearsal dinner that read simply, "I have a gift to offer the guests during toasts," and arranged with the DJ and Father Leary to hand me the mic after the last speech in the parish hall. It was one of those blank cream cards from a box I kept in the linen drawer, meant for thank you notes or condolences. I wrote the message in blue ink, signed only Mom, then slid it into her place setting during the cocktail hour. I watched her find it from across the room. Her fingers hesitated before pulling it fully from the envelope. She read it fast, didn't look up, folded it once, tucked it under her charger plate. She knew. I'd already coordinated with the DJ earlier that afternoon. He was younger, polite, a little awkward in the way honest people often are. I told him I needed the mic after the final toast. "It's a family matter," I said, flat but firm, "and Father Leary has approved it." The DJ blinked twice, but he didn't push. He just nodded and tapped the mic's volume slider to confirm. Father Leary was waiting near the catering doors when I circled back to the parish hall. "We're set," he said. "Just signal me. I'll step up if needed." His support wasn't loud. It was steady, the kind that doesn't need explanation. That kind had been missing from my life too long. I spent the rest of the rehearsal dinner sipping water, listening, smiling when appropriate. Rachel gave a speech thanking chosen family for making the journey. She didn't mention me once. James said something about how lucky he felt to have a partner so capable and self-made. The guests applauded. I folded my napkin into a perfect triangle and placed it on the table. No anger, just readiness. After dessert, while people lingered over coffee, Rachel caught my eye across the table and smiled too widely, too hard. I smiled back. The day of the wedding, just after cake was cut, I stepped up onto the modest stage in my silver dress, took the microphone from the DJ, and said, "It's my turn to give gifts. I hope you're all ready," watching Rachel's face freeze like wet plaster as cameras swung toward me. The DJ didn't make eye contact, just handed me the mic and stepped back, exactly as we'd rehearsed. I stood with both feet planted, pages folded clean in my left hand, remote clicker in the right. Behind me, the projector screen lit up as Father Leary powered it on from the back wall. The room wasn't silent at first. There was laughter, chatter, plates being cleared. It took 10 seconds for the tone to shift. By the time I clicked to the first slide, La Scala Events, paid in full $22,500, the clinking stopped. "I've been told," I began, "that family is about appearances. Rachel wanted this wedding to reflect success, legacy, clean lines, no clutter, no history." I clicked again. The forged trust appeared, blown up large enough to read from the back. RJS Revocable Grantor Trust. Secondary, M. Henderson. "That legacy," I continued, "was paid for with money pulled from a trust that doesn't legally belong to her. That trust remains under guardianship, mine, until July 8th, which means every dollar spent has been misused. Every signature below this line is a forgery." Rachel stood, not all at once, more like she was rising against gravity. She didn't say anything yet, just glared, her mouth slightly open like she hadn't prepared for this kind of sabotage. Not public, not this exact shape. I clicked again. The wire transfer, Aspen, $6,750. A private chalet, chef-prepared meals, not one call home to ask permission, not one invitation to her mother. By now, a few guests had pulled out their phones. James's best man leaned toward him, whispering. James didn't move. Rachel took one step toward the stage. "I'm not here for revenge," I said, still clear, still calm. "I'm here to make sure the truth is louder than the performance." I displayed one document at a time on the screen behind me. First, the La Scala invoice, then the forged trust, and finally the affidavit of guardianship. Each one timed to the silence of the guests, deepening shock and one aunt's audible gasp. The room held its breath in pockets. I could see people frozen mid-sip, forks hovering inches from plates. Rachel stood now, rigid, her arms clamped at her sides like she didn't trust them to move without giving something away. James was still seated, his face blank. Not neutral, blank, like he was watching a stranger. I lifted the final sheet. The affidavit was dated, signed, and stamped. Custodial authority granted to me until Rachel's 30th birthday, just 3 weeks away. I tapped the screen. "This document," I said, "was never overridden, which makes every withdrawal up to today unauthorized. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is fraud." In the back, someone stood. Rachel's old college roommate, I think, blonde, always a little too loud. She whispered something to the woman next to her, and both of them began collecting their purses. Movement like that spreads fast. Another guest, older, maybe James's aunt, reached for her shawl. The momentum was shifting. Rachel finally found her voice. "You don't know what you're doing," she said, loud enough to echo. "This isn't the place." I didn't step down. I didn't raise my voice. "You made it the place when you spent public money in private." Father Leary stood behind the last row, arms crossed. I saw him nod once. Not approval, just confirmation. We were past the point of pretending. Rachel's face had gone pale. Not tearful, just stunned, as if she'd never imagined the past could show up this clearly, this calmly, this documented. She started moving toward the front. When I read out loud, "These funds were drawn without consent from a trust I control until next month," Father Leary stood behind me, nodded gravely, and said, "We'll be halting this event pending clarification." As Rachel tried to lunge for the mic and her fiancé stepped back from her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. Rachel moved like someone who still believed proximity could reverse momentum. Like if she could just get the microphone, get in front of it, she could twist the narrative back into something flattering. But she'd miscalculated the room. She didn't see the looks. Or maybe she saw them and thought she could still perform through them. James didn't move to stop her. He didn't reach for her hand or shoulder. He stepped back, a full pace. It was subtle, but final. The air shifted. Like everyone understood that whatever came next, he wasn't going to be part of it. Rachel reached the edge of the stage and started to speak, but I raised the final document, her forged signature on the Emancipation Clause, and the crowd hushed again. I said, "This signature was filed at the clerk's office under my name. It was never mine." She didn't deny it, not out loud. Her jaw flexed once, then she looked past me, to the guests, to the caterer, to the videographer frozen near the soundboard. She was calculating damage now, not denying it. Father Leary didn't need to speak twice. "Out of fairness to all parties," he said, stepping forward, "the remainder of this event is suspended. Anyone who has questions should direct them to the office. Not to the bride, not to the mother." Whispers became murmurs, then guests began to rise, some furious, others stunned, while her soon-to-be mother-in-law grabbed her purse and left. Rachel stammered, "It's not what you think," but no one was listening anymore. The caterers paused, then started clearing plates as if cued. A few guests stood awkwardly between the dessert table and the exits, unsure if staying meant loyalty or guilt. James's sister left without a word, pushing through the side door with tight, quick steps. The photographer lowered his camera and didn't raise it again. I stayed where I was. Rachel didn't look at me. Her dress, still perfect, still pressed, seemed too heavy now. She clutched the hem like she might trip, though the floor was clear. James remained by his table, back straight, hands in his pockets. He hadn't touched her since the mic was passed. Someone near the back muttered, "Jesus," and someone else whispered, "She forged everything?" No one shouted. No one defended her. Rachel tried once more, voice too high. "We'll fix it. It's just." Mom misunderstood some of the documents. That word again. Mom, as if dragging me back into the role, softened what she'd done. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The screen behind me still glowed with the last slide. The affidavit, the real signature, the date. A truth she couldn't redact. Her college roommate slipped out quietly. Then two of the groomsmen, one aunt, stayed seated, hands folded, refusing to look at anyone. Her face had gone hard. By Monday morning, the event venue had filed a report, the trust account was frozen by my attorney with Carol's help, and I received a courier envelope containing new access codes and a set of reclaimed checkbooks, along with a small velvet box holding the heirloom locket I'd given Rachel years ago, quietly returned. The envelope was hand-delivered just after 9. No note. Just documents and the locket. Its clasp still loose from years of wear, the photo of Michael and baby Rachel still inside. She hadn't destroyed it. Just given it back, the way someone might return keys to a house they no longer expect to enter. The checkbooks had my name embossed in gold, the way they were meant to be. My attorney, through Carol, had moved fast. Emergency injunction, verified fraud, expedited freeze. By noon, the trust was locked under court oversight pending a full audit. The parish issued a formal statement citing, quote, event complications due to unresolved legal matters. The wedding site was already pulling photos. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. The kind of clean that comes not from winning, but from refusing to let someone drag you further into silence. I placed the locket in my safe, right beside the affidavit. One memory. One fact. I made a cup of tea, sat at my table, and opened my notebook to a fresh page. On the top line, I wrote, "Rachel no longer has access." And beneath it, in smaller print, "Neither does my guilt."